Good morning, everyone. I'm Jo Priest, a construction partner at Maples Teesdale, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to our third annual Diversity in Real Estate networking event, Inclusive Leadership for the Future. Inclusive leadership means a lot of things to different people, and we're very lucky today to be joined by some fantastic panelists to help share their views on this topic and to discuss what in their minds inclusive leadership means and what benefits inclusive leadership can bring both personally and to our organisation. Inclusive leadership is something that we feel very passionate about here at Maples Teesdale. We're keeping a close eye on how this is developing, which is one of the main reasons we are so pleased to be hosting this event today. So let me introduce our panelists. We have the ever insightful Anna Wesson, Chief Executive and founder of Key Coaching, Janie Thorne, Head of Legal Eastern Region at Network Rail, Vanessa Murray, Asset Manager at Stanhope PLC and founder of Mentoring Circle, and Ros Good, Principal and Managing Director of Avison Young. And moderating the panel will be my colleague Anna Klein, a real estate partner and co-head of diversity and inclusion at Maples Teesdale. Anna has recently been shortlisted for the Collaborative Leadership Award at Legal Week's Women Influence and Power in Law. Congratulations, Anna. So I can safely say she is very well placed to be moderating this event. For further information on our panelists, you can obviously refer to the biographies which we circulated with the confirmation email for this event earlier this week. Following our panel discussion, we will be moving into breakout rooms to discuss the question, what does inclusive leadership and team membership look like for you and your organisation? And what does your organisation do well? And what could others learn from you? The main emphasis for the breakout rooms is to have a positive discussion with practical hints and tips that we can all take away with us. Each group will have a nominated person who can feed back the thoughts of those in their breakout rooms. While we will be recording the main panel discussion, the breakout rooms will not be recorded, so please do feel free to share your experiences. We'll finish today with a Q&A, so please drop any questions you have for the panelists throughout the webinar into the chat box, and they will be picked up in the Q&A session. Finally, given that this is a networking event, we're intending to circulate the name and company details of attendees to all of those attending today. So please do let us know if you'd prefer for your details not to be included by Monday afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anna Wesson, who is going to provide a brief introduction into the concept of inclusive leadership before joining the panel discussion. Anna.
Thanks, Jo, and thanks to Maples Teesdale for having me. I'm delighted to be part of the conversation today. Inclusive leadership can change the way we do business. Organisations which have inclusive cultures show better economic results, better retention, more engaged employees, and hence greater productivity. This is borne out in profitability, share price, and staff data. But what are we talking about when we talk about inclusive leadership? One thing that's true is that there is no set definition, but the one that I really like is this. Inclusive leadership is an approach that ensures all voices are heard. It means being simultaneously curious and self-aware around difference. It involves fostering high levels of trust and articulating a clear purpose, seeking out different views to inform better decision-making. Inclusive leaders create psychological safety, which enhances motivation and drives business performance. I want to make one thing clear here. Inclusivity is not just around demographic characteristics, gender, skin colour, religion, sexuality. It's about welcoming everyone to the conversation, irrespective of the difference that you're aware of. There's much that we don't see, like, for example, neurodiversity or introversion, things that are easy to miss, but that make a huge difference. By moving leadership away from a command and control methodology to one where you're asking for and listening to the perspectives of everyone is game-changing. Whether you're leading a country or a team of 3, being able to harness the thinking power of each member of the group will make the ideas generated better, the risk assessments more robust, and the conversations more authentic. But further than this, from a human point of view, giving everyone a voice is the right thing to do to increase belonging and enjoyment of work. This can be missing where inclusion is absent. I'm a coach, and working with both leaders and those they lead, I can tell you from my work, in professional services particularly, that inclusive leadership is not always easy. Time, client demands, targets mean that it can be easier to tell than to ask. And that can work in a high pressure environment in the short term, absolutely. Soon though, as you know, the wheels start to come off. And given the current competition for talent and the need to deliver for clients in the medium and the long term, it's an approach that's no longer fit for purpose, certainly in my view. So what does that mean in a practical sense for both you and for your team? In most organisations, it means a significant shift. Building the trust and safety for people to share what's true for them takes time and takes consistency. Getting to real inclusion is by no means a quick fix. Broadly, my 3 suggestions centre around 3 themes. 1, self-reflection. What do you bring to the table? 2 is around behaviour. What are you doing to foster inclusion? And what are you not doing that might be hindering it? And then where are your opportunities to develop and change the way things are done? I'm really excited to get into the conversation today. I know there are going to be loads of great ideas in the room. So Anna, let me hand back to you to kick that off.
Thanks, Anna, for that introduction to today's topic and for giving us a really great starting point for our discussion. I'd also like to thank Ros, Jamie and Vanessa for joining us today. And turning to them for the first question, we've heard what Anna, how Anna defines inclusive leadership. I wondered if you could let me know what it means to you and, if possible, give some examples about things you do in your leadership role to make sure that it's exercised in an inclusive way. Should I address that to Jamie?
Hi, yeah, I was going to jump in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm head of legal for Eastern Region at Network Row, as per the biography. We're the largest region in Network Row with nearly 10,500 employees. And our managing director has this phrase of talking about how we must be revolting as leaders. I'm not a fan of the word, but I'm a huge fan of the concept. And basically what the concept is to empower our individuals. So that top-down message is really heavy in terms of doing the right thing and what is the right thing for us to do to put our passengers first. So everything we do in our day-to-day job always has the end user in our minds, and we have this PPF, putting passengers first campaign within the organisation. And so for me, what that really does is really open up, as Anna just said, that conversation that we want the ideas, we want people to come with different things. And I think it's really important. And I think the next step that we're on in this journey, where we still need to improve, is creating that psychological safety around empowering them to be revolting. That's there. But what we need to do is really empower people to stand behind those decisions, make those decisions, feel psychologically safe when they do them. And whether that's through things like assurance regimes, particularly in large organisations. I agree, Anna, we shouldn't be telling, we need to be asking, but actually in large organisations with big decisions and large value decisions being made, I think we can help support some of that psychological safety by putting in some frameworks around assurance. So that's what we're doing at Network Row at the moment.
And Ros, does that reflect some of the things that you're doing at Avison Young? Where's your focus at the moment?
Well, the real estate industry, as we know, suffers from not being a very diverse industry to start with. So we have a significant hill to climb. And for me, the inclusive leadership agendas are just so essentially the conversations that are happening in the boardroom. And I think that what we are seeing increasingly, and certainly in my organisation, that it is a key consideration in the boardroom conversations of how we are managing our people, and the message.
Sorry, we seem to have lost Ros. Vanessa, can I turn to you while Ros comes back on?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure. I was so listening intently to Ros that I feel like we've just lost her. Oh no, she's jumping after.
Hi Ros, you're back. Sorry, we lost you there.
Oh, sorry. I'll turn off my video just because it might. Does that improve the audio?
That would be great. Thanks.
I think the reality that we have to acknowledge here is that you have the recognition of the need from those that are younger within our professional spheres, and you have those who are older in my age group and above who struggle with this in the sense of the emphasis that it's given to it. So there is a lot of a continuous need for that conversation reinforcement, and actually what we see is the pushing from below to above of expectations, what people want to see. But it's equally got to be dealt with very sensitively, because we don't have a particularly diverse organisation, and those that are diverse can feel that they are kind of picked upon, championed, used as sort of poster people, and actually they feel that very deeply as a, well, hang on, I'm not the tokenism can come in. So this is an incredibly sensitive area, and I've been invited to get involved with the RICS for the women's event next month, and this term intersectionality has come in, and I love it. And for those that don't know it, because I didn't know it before, intersectionality is actually dealing with the individuals, and you're dealing, going back to Anna's point, you're dealing with people very much at that individual level, rather than this amorphous, Black professionals group, women's group. You're talking about people, and you have to emphasize the people and the individual needs. And actually, I think if we get into that essence of dealing with the individuals rather than having this global definitions, we'll get far closer to responding to people's needs.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a very new approach, isn't it? And I think possibly harder to implement for larger businesses than smaller. So yeah, I mean, over to you really, Vanessa. Is that something you're looking at the individual?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, there's kind of two strands. I think what's really interesting is that in larger organisations, and I work for Stanhope, we're a developer, and we do big projects, but as a team, we're relatively mid-sized, so there's 60 of us in total, there or thereabouts. And what sort of really struck me in the course of what we're doing here today, I guess, is the approach from the management team. I do think that there's goodwill from senior level to make it an inclusive environment, but I don't think that that it's a particularly easy thing to do, and so people tend to stagnate and not really make a decision. And there are so many acronyms going around at the moment. It's like ESG, EDI, like all these things. And so my feeling, wrongly or rightly, is that at senior leadership level, people tend to sub it out. So, okay, you can be in the D&I group, you can be in this group, and I don't really understand what it is, so I'm going to pass it over to someone who does, and then they can feel that will make sure from a tick box approach that our organisation are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like this needs to be part of a wider conversation where it's made part of the day-to-day. So it shouldn't be I'm going to refer you to our D&R group so that we can make sure that we're being inclusive. No, what are we doing in general, and how are we bringing everybody into the conversation so that you don't have the tokenism that Ross is talking about? Because that's something that, you can't just highlight one area, can you, in your business and say, well, this is an example of how we're being diverse. It needs to be part of the DNA. And I think in terms of inclusive leadership from our side, and this is something that I think our CEO is actually really good at, is understanding what your strengths are. And again, going back to Anna's point a bit about being really self-aware, you have to know where your own strengths are so that you can fill in the gaps with your weaknesses, and make sure that the people who perhaps have skills in areas that you don't are filling in there to make sure that your organisations are delivering as a whole, and that you're covering all those areas. And I think it stops you from just recruiting carbon copies of yourself in your organisations, to make sure that actually you're sustainable in the long term. And then by extension, those people feel that they have a voice and they're less likely to leave, and it has business impacts and financial benefits as well. So I'll probably stop there, because otherwise I'll go on for ages about it. But for me, that's a really key element of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of our next questions really is, it is true, often you do challenge to get senior leadership on board. does anyone have any kind of tips or examples of how you can, get that buy-in from senior leadership?
Can I come in on that point? Because my suggestion is that this is very rarely an absence of will. It's much more an absence of knowing what to do. And it absolutely talks to the point that you've just made, Vanessa, that people go, I don't really get this, let me palm it out to somebody who might. So I think, broadly speaking, and of course there'll be exceptions, but broadly speaking, there's an acceptance that this has to happen, that we have to have more inclusive organisational cultures. But the challenge is, but what does that mean? Concretely, what does that mean for me tomorrow? What are the conversations I should be having? How do I put that into action? And certainly in my coaching work, I increasingly have quite senior leaders saying to me, I'm in for this. I'm keen to get on this programme, but I literally don't know where to start. And therefore I'm terrified. And so therefore I back off from it. And I think actually it's saying we don't all have the answers, but we all have a little bit of an answer. We all have a suggestion, a way of working, a way of making people feel more included. Let's share that. Let's kind of compile all the information, chuck it all into a pot and see what works in that kind of trial and error, generous way of working that says, if you make a mistake, that's okay if it's made with the right intentions.
Yeah. Yes, so it's almost like it's better to try something and get it wrong than to do nothing at all.
Yeah,
exactly that.
And I was just going to come in here in sort of terms of a practical point. At Network Rail, we've found reverse mentoring working really well. And, sort of that, I'm a senior leader at Network Rail. I'm being reverse mentored by, a lower band employee on race. And it has just been really transformative for me, and actually particularly for being able to have a really open conversation about the fact that I'm a white middle class woman. I live in a white middle class area. I work in a male white dominated industry. And actually, we can all sit there and say, I'm not racist, and all of those things, but actually, what do I call out? What do I challenge? And I've been given a really safe space to have those conversations. And as I say, this reverse mentoring goes on across the whole organisation, not just around issues of race. You can be reverse mentored on any particular topic, but there's a massive focus because, as you say, Anna, that will is there, and people want to know more, but don't know what to do. So actually, let's just have that conversation amongst ourselves and empower each other to have those conversations and empower everyone in the organisation. Yes, there has to be that top-down passion for diversity and inclusivity, but actually, what we can learn so much from is that sort of, the bottom-up work as well, and the theory being we will hopefully all meet in the middle.
And is that something, Ros, that you're working on at Avison Young? Do you guys have reverse mentoring or other initiatives in place at the moment?
Yes, we've got a very strong mentoring program, but I think what resonating with the sort of practical things that can be done, working through our women's group, and it was a circumstance, and it came off the back of the Sarah Everard situation last year, that we organised through the women's group an event that was focusing on women and women's sense of their positioning in the world. I mean, the Sarah Everard threw out so many elements of the conversation, and we had an event off the back of it, which we organised and invited female colleagues to share experiences where they felt uncomfortable and under threat. And there was an incredible response to this. And we got senior men from the business to read out the stories in a 1-hour session. And it was incredibly powerful because it was young women talking about their experiences of in a working environment, being invited along to go to an event with some guys, have a drink, social networking, and they found themselves feeling threatened, uncomfortable, being an inappropriate behaviour. And to hear a senior managing director from my business telling the story, and they were deeply affected by reading these. And I think it is that demonstrations of people's stories, people's experiences, sharing those, and it's the call out. And I've had women come to me saying, "Oh, I was in this meeting, Ros, and we were ignored. We were," and who was chairing that meeting? I picked up the phone, and I've had the conversation that said, "You've had women in that environment you've made feel very, very uncomfortable. Do you realise you've done that?" I hadn't had any idea I'd done that. Yeah. Well, you have, and I think, you know, the hard yards, because we know we want to change people coming into our businesses. It's the hard yards of how we change the perspectives within them, and I think it needs to be that constant calling out. What can we each individually do at a senior level to just encourage people to think, because they're all busy day jobs, you know, they don't want to have to think about it, but it's not a I can think about it tomorrow agenda now. It's to think about it today and have it in your mind.
Understood. And I suppose on the flip side, that if we're saying as leaders, we've got a responsibility to call out behaviour that we think is unacceptable, and also to listen to the stories of people in our teams. On the flip side of that, you know, if you had a member of your team came to you and said, you know, how can I contribute to inclusivity within our business when I'm not a leader? What kind of advice could you give to those people?
I'm really happy to jump in on that in the sense that I think it's easy to get hung up, isn't it, on leaders and their influence. But Janie, it's really to the points that I think you've landed on earlier in the conversation. This is everybody's business, which doesn't mean that everybody has equal influence or equal responsibility. But what it does mean is that this can't be done by one person or by a leadership team. So I think it's absolutely calling out. It's looking for, you know, who are your allies? Who's doing it really well? And what does that mean in terms of how you work with them and how you support their careers and how everybody takes some ownership for leaning into these difficult conversations and saying, you know, this is hard feedback to hear. I know you don't regard yourself as, I don't know, sexist, but I want to just give you some feedback about how that felt in that conversation. And it's having those hard conversations and being prepared to keep going when people make mistakes and people make missteps, and to say, you know, if they're doing this with the right sentiment, with the right kind of heartfelt desire to make an impact, then I'm going to keep supporting them even when they've tried and it hasn't gone according to plan.
Anna, can I just add to that as well, because I think that's just super interesting. But I also think that being a leader doesn't necessarily mean having a team behind you. It means having influence over other people. So you don't necessarily need to be a top person in an organisation to demonstrate those kind of behaviours. Presumably, wherever you are, you can set by example. And in different organisations, like in agency, it's typically a lot more hierarchical. But some people might be working in very flat structures, when actually there isn't necessarily loads of people below you and loads of people above you, and it's a bit more linear. And I don't know, I can only speak for the environment that I'm in, but generally that organisations do have, like, they are all ears, but like you say, they're very busy setting strategy, doing other things, new business, and they're not necessarily thinking practically about the impact that you know, having an inclusive environment would bring to that. And so if I would just say, for maybe people who are slightly at more mid-level or in those linear structures, that bring the ideas to the table, demonstrate leadership behaviour, even if you're not necessarily in that position. Because on a practical level, I think senior leaders like to be given answers, don't they? You know, you're not doing this. This might go down really well. Have you thought about doing this? Shall we give it a go? Most of them will be like, cool, yes, we'll look better for it, and we'll have a happier team behind us. Let's give it a go, unless they're already demonstrating in other areas. So I do think that, you know, employees who are part of organisations who aren't necessarily in those top dog board positions can still be leaders wherever they sit in the hierarchy.
Yeah, and I just adding to that, I think that's a really good point, Vanessa. And I think it's the power of the collective when you are at a junior level, because it's a very uncomfortable space of wanting to singularly put your hand up and say, we need to do something in this organisation, because you don't feel heard. And operating with this emerging leader group as I do, it is the younger members of our business, and we've had a D&I group in the business with leadership, senior people contributions, and the group out of the emerging leader group came to me and said,
oh, we lost her at the key moment.
I know.
So keen to hear what she was going to say.
What did they say, Ros?
Ros, do you want to turn your camera off again, maybe? Sorry, we lost you again.
Was me okay? Are you hearing me okay?
We're hearing you now. So.
Sorry, I'll turn my video off again. We had this group that just brought themselves together and demanded to be in that conversation. And it was the most energized conversation that we had from the D&I group, having this 4 or 5 young people saying, you know, what about this? What about that? And my goodness me, the impact it made on the senior group of, you know, we've got to listen. This is our talent. We want to keep this talent. This talent will leave our business to go to a business that hears the narrative around the importance of this. And I think it's, I feel lucky in that I have a senior leadership group who are very much engaged in this. And I think there's more of a conversation around how they do it beyond the next level, because you can do a lot of D&I greenwashing in terms of how you represent yourself out into the world. Whereas actually, what are you doing around recruitment and selections and appraisals and all of those things are key to this. But I think that encouragement of the younger people to get together of their own volition to bring a voice to the senior people. I go back to my first thinking around this, the talent piece. Talent retention is a massive conversation in corporates at the moment because of where we are in the world, and that identification of talent and keeping talent is another significant boardroom conversation. You bring that group into the boardroom with the conversation about what matters to them, you'll have senior leadership that will perk up and listen.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing is, quite often you find businesses say, oh, you know, we don't have huge resources, we don't have huge teams to do, you know, to support our D&I initiatives. But actually what we're all saying is, yes, you can have incredible initiatives, but actually you can do all of these basics on all of the, you know, in any business size. You can do it at small business, larger business. It's just having those conversations and those relationships between the team that enable the conversations to happen and then to be acted on, which any business can do. So I think that's really inspiring indeed. So I think that was it on our panel conversation. So I think we're now going to kind of continue the conversations, but in our breakout rooms. I'm going to hand over to Joe just to kind of tell you how it's all going to work, and we'll see you back in this main group shortly. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna, and all our panelists. That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I found myself wanting to jump in on the panel there. So this is now everybody's opportunity to do just that. As Anna said, we're going to jump into the breakout rooms now. There's going to be about 15 minutes to discuss the question that we circulated previously. So just as a reminder, that question is, what does inclusive leadership and team membership look like for you and your organisation? What does your organisation do well, and what could others learn from you? And just again, as a reminder, in each breakout room, there'll be a nominated person present to help collect the ideas discussed, and they're going to feed back into the main group when we rejoin. Out of the discussions from the breakout room, we're hoping to be able to draw together a list of top tips, which will then circulate after the webinar. So Caroline, if you could please place us into the breakout rooms, that would be great. Hope everybody else had as good a group as I had. We had some really, really interesting chats on that. So yeah, hopefully we've all got lots of tips that we can bring back into the room. So I thought I'd just throw it out there to hear a bit about what everybody was talking to. So let's see, Emily, are you there? I could have a let us know
Hi,
what was
Jay.
in your go. Hi, Emily. Hi.
Yes, we had such a good discussion. It was really, really positive. There was Charles and I from Maples, and then Fiona and Pooja from the City of London Corporation. So we worked out quite well there. We had some good representation from two different organisations, and it was really interesting to hear what Pooja and Fiona were saying about their different networks that they have over at City Corporation. They've got lots of different networks going on, and they do sort of quarterly sort of sessions and lots of different topics, which was good. And then sort of out of those networks they do mentoring, which is something obviously we do at Maples as well. So they were saying that was really, really positive. And then another thing that we were saying about was sharing those personal experiences as well. There's something that came out of the panel session and something that I'd be really, really interested to do more of. And I think you can't really appreciate sort of other people's experiences. I think you can think that you can, but you can't until you've actually listened and sort of listen to what they've said and share those experiences. And they were saying also about within those networks, you know, if you are particularly passionate about a certain topic, or you think the organisation can change, they form sort of smaller groups that come off those larger networks. And I think that's really positive as well, because it goes to show, however, like we were saying earlier, you know, however junior you are in the organisation, you can form a smaller network and help to sort of further a cause that you're interested in and something that you feel passionate about, and that goes a long way to sort of changing the culture as a whole. And then we were just saying as well to sort of hammer home the fact that you can be a leader even in a junior position and sort of go to the senior leadership and discuss those things that you feel passionate about. And I think one of the things that is important to note that it's not all junior people feel confident enough to do that. So it's about creating a culture where your senior leadership listen to those junior voices, and that goes a long way to sort of making lots of improvements in different ways.
Oh yeah, great, some great points coming out there. So yeah, I mean, Chris, what came out of your group?
Yeah, some really interesting conversations. Thanks to Julie and Will Taylor for joining, and myself in that. I think one thing that I found fascinating, Julie, in her experience as a consultancy and non-exec roles in the real estate industry, she said that in one particular organization, the mission statements from senior leadership were very important. So mission statement to, you know, be inclusive, and that would then reverberate in meetings across various employee levels. You know, that the first thing that you would say about our business is that we also want to be, you know, perhaps the best real estate specialist firm in this area, but actually we also want to be an inclusive and diverse place to work at, and that enables people to speak up. One interesting question Julie had: what do you do if actually it's clients who are bringing you a big problem as to inclusivity or perhaps behavior? And Zoe had a good experience where that exact happened to her in life, an inappropriate behavior at a client event, and her firm supported her in dismissing that client ultimately. And you know, that's a big statement for a business to make, to be able to support an employee and show that inclusivity. And we asked Zoe, how did you feel about being able to speak up? You know, what made you practically be in a position to share that experience and address that situation? And she said, you know, knowing that there are people who cared about it and knowing who those people are. So you know, that led us to a conversation about champions, about diversity and inclusivity in your business, but not ones that are just there to whitewash the business from it, those who quite genuinely do care. And Will had some really interesting experiences. He's a practice manager, having gone into a business where there were very low retention rates, high staff turnover. And first thing that he did, from what we understood, was do surveys, intrinsic surveys, understand why people felt like that. And one thing that came out is this big gap between senior management and all the rest of the employees, no bridging conversations. So what he said was very powerful, is having to tell those senior members of staff, the directors, a criticism that they didn't want to hear, that they had to hear if they wanted to keep their business profitable, because in order to be profitable, you need to retain your best talent. So, you know, perhaps starting thorny conversations about those topics was important. So those few practical things I thought came out of our group conversation. So thank the team for that.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. I mean, it certainly is that having the thought of having people you can approach that isn't tokenism, but people that genuinely are there, and those people who could have relationships with the senior management. So like you're saying, having those slightly more tricky conversations. I think, Ros, that picks up a bit on some of the stuff you were saying in the panel. What other points got pulled out from your group?
Yes, well, I'm going to turn my camera off because my thing is unstable rather than being all over the shop. Firstly, great to see Chris as part of this. I'm always very anxious that these D&I conversations can be very female orientated. So well done, Chris, and fellow males on the call, because please encourage your males to come on these calls. I think that's part of the battle. No, really good conversation with Erin, who's Jersey based, and we were picking up on a couple of things actually, because Erin was talking about the draw for a business like hers in Jersey and the nature of an island like Jersey, and it very much sort of pulls the local population, and therefore the pool is dictating what you have within the organisation, and it sort of prompted that conversation around, you know, you've got what you've got in a business, which you've got to work with. I'll come back to that, but actually we're all trying to change the look and feel of our businesses in terms of bringing in more diverse candidates, and this whole approach to businesses looking at who they're bringing in, how they're bringing them in. Avis and Young and all the other big firms will pull from the same pool: Reading, Bristol, Oxford, Brooks, and you know, you get the same people. And we're challenging the conversations internally with our people to say, come on, what about apprenticeships? You've got to tackle the S in ESG as part of this D&I conversation, because you are trying to diversify the pool of people and enabling a wider social cohort to come into this industry. So there is that. How are we going out? How are we finding people and challenging that in your business? Challenge it, because you want to be seeing that. Again, talent retention. Young people want to be seeing these conversations going on in schools, pulling young people in for work experience and apprenticeship opportunities. So that was an interesting conversation around the recruitment side, and then dealing with what you're dealing with internally. You know, we most of us have the appraisal systems in place of one shape or another, and actually building D&I into those conversations, and using women who are having a child, how they're perceived in the business from a maternity point of view. I know it from my own experience. Some men will just write you off for, well, you know, it's no longer taking your career seriously, and addressing those biases at the appraisal stage of a woman who's either pregnant or thinking she's going to have children, to say, I'm putting out my stall here. I've got a career. I'm expecting blah 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 blah. You're suddenly opening up the conversations in that important space of intersectionality, coming back into the individual's needs and wants, and ensuring that in that appraisal process you're breaking any bias in the opportunities that are presented to the individual. So yeah, it was a good conversation.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky at Maples, because I've just come back off. Well, no, it's not just now, but I came back from maternity about a year ago, and have since been made up to partner. And they've been brilliant at having those conversations with me throughout. And that's, you know, it's really encouraged my loyalty to the firm, and hopefully given that, shown the younger associates that's a possible path as well. So you know, I'm really grateful to Maples on that one. Oh crikey, we could talk about this forever, and I've just noticed the time, which is very disappointing for me anyway. So yeah, I'm going to throw this back over to Anna now to just pick up any questions that we've got and to wrap up the session. But thank you so much everyone for being part of such an enlightening conversation.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, there was, I can't see there's any questions in the chat, but we did get one emailed into us, which was, any of our panelists have any top tips for how to run an inclusive meeting? So what can you actually do to make sure that if you're running a meeting, it's inclusive?
That's a really good question, actually. So whoever asked that, well done for emailing that in. For fear of sounding a little bit like a broken record, I think for me, it always just comes back to that point around psychological safety. So literally making people feel empowered in that meeting room, that every single person has a voice. Giving everyone an opportunity to speak, and equally for those that don't wish to speak, that is also fine, and that's part of that safety element as well. But just for me, in all meetings, just giving everyone the space, asking people the questions, and the big thing, listening. Which can be a challenge when we're time pressured and we're trying to get an output, the thing agreed by the end of the meeting, and it's so easy to rush into that solutionizing. So yeah, for me, it's the sort of holy trinity of safety, asking and listening.
And Tony, actually, to add to that, on the psychological safety thing, which I think is, I completely agree with you, is the most important. I was listening to a podcast, so I'm a complete podcast fanatic, and I was listening to one where Matthew Saeed was talking. The podcast is called Direct the CEO, and anyway, they had this whole thing about it, so definitely worth a follow-up listen for anyone who's interested in this topic, which hopefully you all are because you're studying it. One of the things they were saying that Amazon does, which I thought was really good, was in their business model, when they have a meeting like that, they always make the junior members of staff, they not make them speak first, they don't force them to speak in the meeting, obviously. They direct their questions to the junior members of staff first, so that they don't hear from the senior leadership and then just reiterate what they've said. Because if they do, if they're thinking on a completely different track that actually might be really valuable to an organisation because they're seeing it from a different perspective, if they just parrot what a senior member of staff has said because they're thinking, oh God, I wasn't thinking on that line at all. It's actually much more useful for a business to start off with that and then build up. So they always listen to the most senior members last, which I think just as a general tip would be quite useful for anyone running a meeting to do that. And also, then you have an opportunity for the junior members to be heard without being drowned out by the senior members. So perhaps that could be a psychological safety tip.
Love that. That is a great way to secure that diversity of thought and thinking. Brilliant.
And,
really,
and I would
really
just
good.
add to that, sharing an agenda with questions in advance so that anybody who struggles to come up with ideas on the spot is really helpful. And also, if you're looking for innovation, ask for dissent. Don't say, does anyone agree with this? Say, who doesn't agree with this and what's the point that you've got to raise? Because we're all ears. And so sometimes you might even need to say to somebody, right, you're devil's advocate in this meeting. I want you to disagree constructively with everything that we're talking about in order that you go in different directions.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Just two things from me, because I think the reality for a lot of people in meetings is not being in control of meetings. And I think the most important first conversation is be in meetings with people who are chairing meetings. And after that meeting, make a point of talking to them to say, can I just make an observation to help you with your further meetings? Could you think about, because for me, there are people in that meeting that didn't contribute and you weren't giving them the chance to do so. Again, it's pointing out things to people they don't realise they're doing.
Yeah.
And one final thing, Anastasia, if I can give a plug, because I've been watching a TED Talk, Joan Williams, Why Corporate Diversity Programs Fail, on TEDx, which I've sent to my CEO, which I think if you all look up and send to your CEO, because it talks about evidence and metrics. And the data piece around D&I is, we haven't talked about it, but I think it's a really important conversation because the CEOs get data and they get evidence and they get metrics and they like all of that. So that's a good TED Talk.
So what was that again, Roz? I'll just pop it in the chat.
It's Joan Williams, Why Corporate Diversity Programs Fail. So it's all fairly, it's nothing new in the concepts, but actually what she draws together is that CEO piece, which is to say, popping that into your CEO's inbox will go down very well.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to receiving it later. Super. So listen, that's been such a helpful session and really interesting, and we've got so many ideas. Now, as Joe mentioned, we were hoping to get a fairly short list of ideas, but I think that we're going to have quite a long list of ideas that will circulate, and I'm aware that some of the feedback we didn't have time for that, but I'm sure we'll pick that up separately anyway and incorporate that if that's okay. Again, we're just so grateful to our speakers, Anna, Ros, Vanessa and Joe and Janie as well, and also Caroline, our colleague Caroline Dalbany in the background, making sure it all works smoothly, so thank you, Caroline, as well. And we hope you've all found this morning genuinely interesting and that you're leaving with some kind of practical ideas for yourselves and for your businesses. And just to touch again on what Joe said, because of the breakout rooms, we've not had a chance to meet everybody. So if there is somebody that you haven't had a chance to catch up with, once you get the list of attendees, hopefully you can find a way to get in touch with them and create some more links, because I think that's what this is all about, is learning and also creating links between ourselves. So that's the end of our formal session, but Vanessa has kindly offered to stay online for a little bit longer if anybody's got any questions for her about the mentoring circle. So other than that, if you would like to speak to Vanessa, stay on. If not, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.